Episode 238. This is a special edition of Conscient Podcast in the Roundtable series. And those who recall, the roundtables are informal conversations that usually take an hour or two and explore issues of interest to a group of individuals and things that they're passionate about, and allows for free-flowing speech and listening. And when I record the introductions like I'm doing now, I improvise them radio style, so there's no second takes. This is it. So this episode features Aaron Liu Rosenbaum, Barry Truax, Jacek Smolitsky, Kathy Kennedy, Lindsay French, Natalie Dusek, Sabine Breitzemeter, Vincent Andri Sani, and myself. We were on Zoom. This group is part of a project at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, actually in Burnaby, called Sonic Research Group. And we get together every month or so and talk about acoustic ecology. And three of us, Lindsay French, Jacek Smolitsky, and myself, were particularly interested in the issue of low-tech in the sense of how will we manage in a world where there is less energy and less access to technology and still do the work that we care about, in this case, acoustic ecology. And by the way, this group has already been featured on Conscient Podcast in episode 157 and 170. So if you're interested in acoustic ecology, those are good conversations. So when we talked in early June 2025, it centered around three research questions, and I'll read them to you. First, how can we continue our work in acoustic ecology in a world with less energy and in perpetual crisis, including the climate emergency, the depletion of non-renewable resources, massive loss of biodiversity, and so on? That's a big one. That was the first one. The second, what role can artistic practice in acoustic ecology play in the transition towards sustainability? So many of us in the group are artists or arts researchers, so this is a very relevant question. How can our artistic practice flourish with less machines, less technology, less mediation, or at least electronic mediation? Finally, the third question is, what steps can we take now to prepare for a better future for generations of acoustic ecologists to come? So you'll hear our thoughts and reflections and questions about this question within the context of acoustic ecology, but it seems to me that it's relevant to any given field. How can we prepare the way for future generations to have what they need to do their work, to make a living from the work, but also to have it be distributed and understood and applied when we will most likely have much less available resource, at least for a period of time, and we'll have to manage what we have much more carefully. I anticipate, and I think that's just a fact of life, the way that we're consuming things, there won't be enough left to continue the way we are now. But that doesn't mean that we can't do things differently or possibly better. And we pulled together a set of resources that you'll find in the episode notes that are quite inspiring examples of projects and activities and conferences and prototypes and ways of doing from all around the world that truly are remarkable and low-tech and have many advantages compared to the bigger systems that we have now. And maybe we'll find a way to combine the big and the small, but this focus was on low-tech and how it is currently being done and could continue to be done in the future by the next generation of artists and researchers. So here we go. The conversation is unedited. You'll hear it as is, and I hope you enjoy and feel free to feedback. Take care. So let's start. This is a special session of the Sonic Research Group with a topic that I've coined low-tech, but it's really talking about how technology is changing, not necessarily for the better, but certainly there will be less available energy we anticipate in the future, or at least there will be a different scene. And how can we continue to do our work in acoustic ecology with less? Anticipating that less. We don't know what it will be exactly. Will it be just fewer technological tools? Will it just be restricted energy? We don't know that. So I have thoughts on it, but I thought I'd ask Lindsay and Jacek, who were part of the organizing group with me, just to throw some ideas out there to get us going. And then let's just have one of those our regular conversations about this topic and any related topics, of course. But Lindsay, do you mind starting and just kind of throwing a few ideas and why the idea interests you?
For sure. Yeah. And I also just wanted to say, like, I really appreciated the questions that you shared to sort of frame our thinking. And I appreciated spending time with the resources that both you and Yasik had shared as well. Like, I feel like I've learned a lot, even just, yeah, going through some of those. And for me, some of the things I think that I continue to grapple with, and I wonder if other people grapple with as well. Are these like questions of scale? Cloud, I think in some of your writing you were talking about the sort of like large scale versus the grassroots effort. And I'm always thinking about that in terms of like, where do I want to put my time and energy versus like where do I have influence? And I feel that particularly in like a contemporary political moment where like grassroots efforts are really important, even just for regular systems of care. And like I can imagine um, those systems and networks of care um, sort of helping us understand our creative networks as well, or sort of where those overlap. Um, but I wonder as well, like when and where and if and how that sort of grassroots organizing can have greater impact than just on our more local communities. So that's something that I grapple with in terms of how we organize and how we organize together and sort of where our choices can have impact. So if we're really good at setting up a really small scale internet, for example, one of the examples in here was how to set up a small scale internet. How can that sort of like transform to like, yeah, bigger impacts or political impacts or bigger cultural impacts? So that's like a question that uh, yeah, is like one of the biggest things for me. And then also like, how does that relate to justice and injustice? Like when we're sort of, I think it's really important that we imagine, like, yeah, and that project in Sweden, the regenerative energy communities was really cool. Like it was a lot of like, sort of like the workshops interested me as well. Like how can we sort of practice these skills and then like, and then how do we like work on those while there's also all of this injustice? So like those are the sort of questions that are swirling in mind, like as an artist and thinking about energy. So I'll throw maybe some of those questions out there onto the list and pass it on to Jacek.
Yeah, sure. I put the questions and the resources in the chat, and I'll put them also in the episode notes. Yeah, Chuck, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Laura, for organizing this. Yeah, I think I have quite similar observations, and maybe to kind of continue what Lindsay said about the scale, I see the scale in relation to, or like the small scale versus the macro scale. I see it in relation to habits versus policies, and I think that debate has also been within sustainability for quite some time. You know, like shall we act on the level of people's habits, or shall we act more centrally and try to change policies on a macro scale in a way? And I think, you know, like we have to probably work with both, but I think it's often good to start and to look at habits. And I've been just reflecting on the very tool that we are using at the moment, the Zoom, and we kind of got accustomed to it. We take it for granted, but I was reading some statistics about how much emissions, you know, 1 hour of video conference creates, and I have some digits here. It's between 2 to 12 liters of water, and it's an equivalent of 11% of the emissions from a gallon of gasoline. And just a simple gesture of turning off the video, for instance, can quite radically decrease the amount of emissions. So I was going to suggest that maybe we should turn off our screens and try to listen to each other instead, since it's also all about sound, right? But I leave it up to everyone in a way. So this is one dimension or two dimension, the habits versus policies, and there are very interesting technical solutions and small add-ons. For instance, the book that I also recommended, The Decomposed, The Political Ecology of Music by Kyle Devine, also discusses several interesting small additions to our daily digital habits, such as an add-on to your web browser that allows you to see, for instance, how a given service or company is dealing with their energy sources. So it kind of creates a breakdown of what sources, how many renewable sources are being used for sustaining that particular service, how many dirty sources of energy are used, and so on. So this is yet another way of like working on that level of habits, of digital habits that we've been taking for granted, and try to kind of rethink them in a way. And one other thing that I've been looking into a little bit is the problem of invisibility, or maybe the invisibility of the problem. And I've been just thinking about situations in which people had to radically change their everyday life practices. And of course, the obvious example would be a war, right? Or military conflict, or some kind of a really impactful, sudden catastrophe. And I think the problem with the climate change is that it's not of that kind in a way. I mean, the problem it's not really a problem, but like one aspect of climate change that is so stretched in time that it doesn't create that effect that would mobilize us to act suddenly, as for instance would war situation. I was looking for some examples within the realm of design, sustainable design or restorative design, and I don't know if you're familiar with the utility design movement in the UK during the 1940s, during the Second World War, which was a governmental initiative to produce standardized and functional and also effectively quite reasonably priced goods, clothing and furniture. A lot of it made from repurposed material, also from material that came from the rubbles, of the war and so on. And this movement actually continued after the war as well. And people developed good habits, drawing on their experiences from this, from this period of the Second World War. So I've been also thinking about that aspect, like how to. It doesn't mean that we have to start visualizing, making the current crisis or public crisis in some way more impactful, more visible, more harmful to us, especially here in the in the global north and in Western Europe, where we are often detached from the very effects of human accelerated climate change, in order to precisely instigate or infuse those kinds of changes in our everyday life habits. So this is another thought, kind of a loose thought that I've been reflecting on, also based on some of the materials that we were we are sharing among each other. And I will stop here and
Sure.
other speaks. There's a whole list of other.
And I'm listening to your breath and your pace because I can't see you say I'm done. So I like this audio because also people listening are on the podcast. It's going to be an audio thing. So Kathy Kennedy has joined us. Welcome, Kathy. We're going camera off because we're trying to save energy and also listen to each other a bit better. So why don't we, there's 5 who haven't spoken yet, and I'll speak maybe later on when the conversation gets going, and maybe I'll just call upon you, and similar to Lindsay and Jacek, just say some opening thoughts on the topic, and then we'll just really converse as we usually do. Natalie, do you want to start, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone who's spoken so far this meeting. I'm really excited about what we're gonna talk about today. It dovetails quite well with my master's thesis research that I'm working on at the moment, and so I'm really glad to be hearing what all of your thoughts are on this topic. I think I'll just start off by saying A few of my thoughts are, so basically my research is investigating, coming from my own sort of like existential crisis that we all know, like what is the role of sound in times of crisis, specifically the environmental crisis. I have come to grad school, I have put myself in this field, but then I was like, oh, kind of, is the work I'm doing anything? And so my question that I'm investigating kind of is like, what is the role of sound art and music in times of crisis, specifically the environmental crisis? And I'm taking a very affect theory approach to understanding sort of like emotion and feelings, and how emotion and feelings are understood through climate and ecological engaged art, and then kind of like musing on what, where can we go with those feelings, and yeah, so I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say, and it fits very well with the work I'm doing. Something I've been really inspired by lately is the Small File Film Festival, which Laura Marks puts on. And Laura Marks, who's at SFU, does a lot of incredible work on thinking about the environmental impact of streaming media. And so the project that I'm doing is both research, it's research creation, and I am using a lot of like also nostalgic and old technology in making the art that I'm making. I'm using like a camcorder from my childhood. So it's a lot swirling around, and I guess maybe this is more just like adding more questions than necessarily any answers. But I guess that's what's swirling around in my mind right now, and I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say. And I think it's super fulfilling to the work I'm doing right now. So that's what I'll say for now.
Well, that's very helpful to know that it's a topic of research of yours, so this can be an ongoing conversation in the Sonic Research Group as we, talk about a new idea. We could talk also about the impact, the environmental impact of that activity. I think in this community we do that a bit more than others, but we just tend to forget. We get excited about technology and then off we go, and without any measurement or a sense of impact. So maybe I'll ask Sabine to speak, and maybe the person speaking can turn their camera on. That'll be a little bit of technology that would be worthwhile.
Yes, I agree. I'm not so familiar with you yet, and also not familiar with your voices yet. So I don't mind seeing you, because it will be kind of sustainable in terms of socially sustainable, I think. All right. Yeah, I think so. This is important too. I think this idea of low tech, it's something, I don't know whether one of you has ever visited a refugee camp of South Sudanese people in Uganda, for example, a so-called Rhino camp. And this is very, very poor people, displaced people from their original, where they come from. And they take really, they are masters in using small parts of everything, small parts of electronics, small parts of really technological, tiniest items, and they build up what is in your sources described as an internet with low tech. And I had the privilege to work, or still have the privilege to work together with the RUC Agency for Cultural Transformation here in Berlin. And they are giving workshops how to use media in places like that in order that people can participate in the media world, but on their own terms, and with this kind of recycling ideas, or the ideas of media povera, we could maybe even say. And this is something which they really train the people living there to do so, by enabling local people to teach that. And I find that very, very interesting. And I think it needs a lot of attention. That's one thing. The other idea which comes into my mind is that I think that listening has one very, very important role, and this is the role of being directed and also to, I don't know how to express that in English properly, to be, to approach a person, to care for a person. You only listen to something if you care for that. And this idea of care, I think this is something we should enable people more to do. I think the idea of care has been very much neglected, a kind of a mindset of care. We went through decades where the contrary was taught to children at school. You have to say something if you want to be perceived, and you have really, that this kind of care idea was really, really neglected. And to my opinion, if you support this idea of care in the social realm and also in the individual development of a person, we can change much more than by, just saying, let's turn off the cameras, which I think is a good thing to do. But in just pointing to, please do this and don't do that, but please care for this. So what kind of consequences has what you're doing in a social sense, in the sense of sustainability, in the sense of peace and war, in the sense of freedom, and so on and so on. I think that would be, to my opinion, a promising approach.
Thank you, Sabine. I put the link to the conversation we had on Conscient, episode 175, where you talk more about that for those who are interested. Interesting. A couple of thoughts come up for me. I'll actually say them now before I forget. One is that this week, my wife and I bought an electronic car, and it's a used car, and we did the best we could to find something that was not too big and, energy efficient. But I was talking to a colleague yesterday who said, yeah, but what about the battery, and where does it go when it's done? And she said, I'm not buying an electronic vehicle until I know where the battery can go. I'm sure there are the beginnings of recycling, but that's part of the longer cycle that I think we have to think about. Anything we do has consequence, and if we start asking those questions, I think we'll make better choices. The other thing is about wartime. If you think about rations, post-war, during war, or after war rations, that's something that Jacek, you alluded to. I think that's very interesting in terms of lessons of what is essential to life, including art and culture, and how do we have systems of rationing either temporarily or on the longer term. So two little ideas. Let's hear from Vincent, and then we'll hear from Kathy and Barry. Vincent.
Thanks, Claude. I think I'll turn my camera on as well. Hoping that you guys can hear me right now, that I've done well to unmute myself. Thanks to Claude, thanks to you for setting this up, and thanks to everybody for sharing some thoughts. I've made a few notes as we were going through, and there are some interesting ideas that have gotten floated already. I'll see if it works out, if I can quickly circle back to them. Claude, I didn't get a chance to look too closely at all of the resources that you shared. Jacek, and I think it was Lindsay put them together. Thank you. Since I was out of town, I haven't had a chance to prepare, but I did look at some of the questions that you asked as a way of sort of prompting some discussion. And I've been thinking about them a little bit over the course of the morning. I read them this morning. And a lot of these questions, I mean, like how salient, but a lot of them, so how salient in terms of the work that we try to do as, folks working in the area of sound and listening, but how salient in terms of how broadly they apply across a variety of disciplines and paradigms. And a lot of these questions extend beyond the climate crisis in and of itself, right? It's they're questions that are pressing for issues of social justice in light of issues of social justice and political polarization, and all of these other things that sort of define this political moment. So I guess a question that a lot of the things that you raise here is, how does the political left deal with some of the most pressing issues of our time, if we wanted to frame it that way. And so in one sense, these questions are they can be applied broadly, beyond the world of sound and acoustic ecology as such. But there is something specific about acoustic ecology's emphasis on sound and listening that's particular about its approach, because I noticed, acoustic ecology came up on a couple of occasions in your questions, 2 or 3 times. Even if the study of sound and listening doesn't belong to acoustic ecology per se, right? There are a lot of disciplines, arts-based practitioners who are interested in sound and listening, and who've thought about and contributed to, how we understand the role of listening in public life. And this, Sabine, is kind of what you're pushing toward with this idea of listening as a responsibility. Kate Lacey has a really good book. Her book, which I'm sure many of you know, Listening Publics, talks about the role of listening as a civic responsibility, which is a beautiful turn of phrase, and it's a beautiful text. So there are many people who've thought about, or many disciplines who've kind of weighed in on the role of sound and listening in public life, and how it can help us navigate this challenging moment. But what is specific, at least from what I can tell about acoustic ecology, and it's something that we discussed at length during my time there, with Barry in Vancouver, it came up time and again. I think actually what sets it apart from other approaches that are studying listening is that its interest is in equal part both research and education. And so not simply studying the world from a sonic perspective, but actually trying to do something to change it. And that thing that I think it's trying to change is best accomplished. And I think that, Barry, you can speak to this with much more depth than I can, is that there's education and pedagogy played an important role in what that paradigm is, or discipline, or however the heck you want to describe it. So for me, the main lens that I would approach many of these questions that you pose here, Claude, is not through the perspective of a soundscape researcher or artist, although, both of these to some degree, greater or lesser, shape my sensibility, but instead it's as an instructor, because that's what I've spent the last 6 years of my life doing. So how to address some of these more pressing issues of our time is I think, in part, not solely, but in part, a project of education. And I have many thoughts on that, but I think that's more than enough to pass the proverbial speaking stick on to the next person.
Well, it's a start. We're already at halfway through the conversation, but there are many ideas that have been positioned, and I think that's part of the exercise, is just mapping out resources, initial ideas, and then making it an ongoing conversation. So Kathy Kenny is a friend of mine. It's her first time in the group. I invited her because we sometimes add people from the sonic research community, and she teaches at Concordia and does a bunch of things. So Kathy, do you want to just say what you think?
Hi, Claude. Thank you so much for having me, and hi to all those I know here, and I'm so happy to hear from. I haven't much to offer. As you know, I've been making environmental art since the early 90s, and now I'm teaching it in both electroacoustics and communications department. And I'm happy about the progress that has arisen due to awareness of the field. I don't think I have anything really to offer. I personally just sometimes just, get exasperated and is anything going to really help? But I invariably go back to thinking about all that Indigenous people teach us all the time and always have. And that is always my go-to for some kind of idea about what to do. That's all I have.
Well, it's a good start. Thanks, Kathy, and welcome. Now, I see Aaron has just added on, but I'm going to ask Barry to speak next. And then Aaron, we're just doing a tour de table with initial thoughts on the topic. And so you'll go after Barry, if you don't mind. Hey, Barry.
Hey, thanks, Claude. Thanks for doing this. The two phrases that you have included, doing more with less and sustainability, have been something that I've been thinking about an awful lot over the years. And I think it's sometimes, with the perspective I've acquired through all those decades, I think sometimes it's important just to remind everybody, particularly our younger colleagues that are sort of in the middle of all this and getting used to it, that there are some fairly obvious things that one can find encouragement in. The first thing about doing more with less, the first thing I'm thinking about is that, my goodness, people who are in niche areas of contemporary art, experimental art, or just simply other themes that may not be necessarily artistic. This is something that they have, in my experience, internationally, they invariably, the ones that really succeed here are the ones that manage to do something significant. And this is why I admire them so much. They manage to do something significant that actually improves the lives of others, I would say, by using minimal resources or available resources, and they are not blessed with a lot of institutional or national or public money and support. There's a long tradition of that, of these artists run everything, right? And there's just many examples in Canada. There's, of course, the alternative galleries, for instance, and then there's individual projects that people, it's often, just called a labor of love. Right, but it's because it's something that they find worth doing, are passionate about it, and they just simply find a way. And so, in one sense, even if there is a sense of diminished resources in the future, I would trust the resilience of people who are dedicated in this way to find a way forward. And fortunately, as other people have already said, we're already in a situation with acoustic ecology that, the listening resources are the most basic to us, and also the ones that are most freely available, at least to people who have protected their hearing. Let's say for that. I just came back from World Music Days in Lisbon. And I have to say that the people I'm thinking of are not just ones in Canada that I know, including many of you, but particularly I've been struck by this in Portugal and Italy, where I've spent quite a bit of time, because in those Southern European ones, they're simply used to, well, put it the other way, they're not used to having a lot of government and public support for what they do. And I am always amazed at the energy and the dedication that they definitely do things that have a positive good with minimal resources. And for instance, in Lisbon, the main organizer of World Music Days, Miguel Asguim, and his family, his friends, his colleagues, right, have been running the Oculto Ajuda for many years, and now they've put on this whole international, festival, for instance, and it's certainly not because they get a lot of external support. and the other place where I did a solo concert, if you know, Jaime Rice, his basically alternative gallery called Incomum. There's another one, you know, and then Raquel Castro, that many of you know. These people in Portugal, they're great examples of it, and I think I always have time for them in that sense of anything I could do to help. And it's the same thing in Italy when I go there. Sometimes I think the Northern European countries, which have a better balance of cultural support, maybe, you know, they also do, but I don't think they necessarily have to struggle as much in this particular way, which is not to devalue what they're doing, but just saying, I think what you do with the resources available really depends on yourself, and how, if you think it's worth doing, then you find a way. You find a way to do it. And fortunately, many of the external aspects of it, you know, I've mentioned listening, but also, you know, in terms of equipment, it's a lot cheaper than it used to be. It used to be very centered in studios and universities and official cultural things. There's been much more of a democratization of that students and you know, they can get to first base if nothing else. So just to put a little bit of a more positive spin on it, even though I would worry about, you know, where all of this is going, I do trust that impulse of people who are determined to make a difference based on what they think is worth doing. The other phrase of sustainability, I actually talked about this in my presentation at World Music Days. Miguel, to his credit, opened up, he not only ran 27 concerts, right, that spanned the entire artistic domain, you know, for an international audience, right? It was just totally amazing, and maintained his energy level throughout the whole thing, and his contagious enthusiasm. But he also opened up an afternoon panel. It was quite diverse. There were some performances, and there was a panel, and there was a keynote, and he asked me to talk about the theme of well, I chose to talk about acoustic sustainability because I'd written this article about 10 or 12 years ago, and it's now on my personal website because the online journal that it was written for became defunct. So I put it. Vincent will remember this because I spoke to his group about this when I was writing it. So it's on the WSP database, of course, and it's also on my personal website under papers about acoustic sustainability. And it was a very short presentation. I don't know, maybe more than 15 minutes, but I was really struck and gratified by how many people afterwards came up to me, you know, quite gratuitously, people I don't know and whatnot, and just said how inspiring they found it. And I was thinking, well, this is just kind of a brief summary of what we've been doing at SFU, like just a 15-minute like, basic introduction. Two of the themes that I chose for that article were not the one that might be obvious within a musical context, is how composers can contribute. And I still think that is important, that the artistic work, if you so choose, can address extra musical concerns such as ecology and all that. But as Miguel said, you know, quite succinctly, one piece is not going to solve the climate crisis, but it is going to affect perception, people's perceptions. And picking up on what various people have said about education and artwork, you have to be careful not to fall into the trap of, is it all worth it? Because you don't know. This is the thing that has fascinated me about being an educator and just being propelled to keep doing this as long as possible, is that you just never know. It's like the old metaphor, you plant the seeds and you have no idea which ones are going to grow. But you have to have faith that with the multiplier effect, even though we would regard ourselves normally as a kind of minority voice, there's a multiplying effect that is quite obvious in education, is that you spread a few seeds and then those people go through the same process, and who knows what influence they may have. So in a certain sense, you really have to trust that process and not feel that you can control it. You make the offer, you put everything out, you get people thinking, and then they have to decide for themselves. And I do believe that soundscape composition in all of its varied forms can raise the issue and change the awareness from the status quo, which is often what happens in the arts. But the other aspect, of course, I had to say again as an educator, because traditional music education and in some ways education in general does not really prepare people well, in my opinion, for tackling these problems. And that's why I think education is so important, right from all of the terminology in the Handbook for Acoustic Ecology that I'm still teaching and all of that. Musicians have to decide if they're going to take some responsibility for the oral health and acoustic sustainability of the culture. They're going to have to learn more about areas other than, the classic, how to read music and perform, things like that. They need to know about hearing loss. They need to know about the impact of noise. They need to know about acoustics. Electroacoustic people also need to know about acoustics and sound and to have viable skills and a knowledge base. So it's not easy to say, well, it's a good start to say yes, if the person does feel some responsibility for dealing with these issues. But it also means that they're going to have to broaden, well, first of all, broaden music to sound, for instance, and broaden performance to also listening and thinking about and experiencing sound walks and everything that we have to offer. And it's also providing a different kind of model, an interdisciplinary model, rather than the narrow disciplinary and multidisciplinary stuff that we've all inherited. It is promoting this other, more systems-based model that gets people to think about relationships and an acoustic habitat, just as Bernie Krause made us aware that the bioacoustic habitat was just as important as their biological habitat, right? It's the same thing for the built environment and things like this, and the skills and the awareness. But sometimes it really just takes, just like my little 15-minute talk, I'm not sure, again, what effect it had, but the initial feedback was, that, boy, this is a breath of fresh air. And like after 50 years, really, it's amazing how sometimes it doesn't take too much to get the ball rolling, so to speak.
Well, like Kathy said, Indigenous peoples have had sustainable ways without getting romantic about it. There's just facts there of how they lived and how they live today. We only have 20 minutes left, so I want to get into a little bit of banter. Thank you for that, Barry, though, because it's a great reminder. And all of you, I'll put the links that you suggested in the resource list so that those who weren't here today can actually just get inspired by that list, because there's so many things, so many projects going on around the world. Now, Aaron, you arrived a bit late, but do you want to say anything about the topic at this point? I'll take that as a maybe. Don't seem to be.
He's still connected. He's muted.
Yeah. Okay, well, you can pipe in later if you'd like, Aaron. So we've had these initial thoughts. Now, are there additional things that come to mind that you'd like to add for us to further understand this set of issues? Just raise your hand or just speak.
Just one more brief comment that on this. I think there's always a danger. You even alluded to it, Claude, in your email about is it a topic that maybe is not as inspiring? I think it can be inspiring, but I would be careful for not making it having a negative sort of thing. I think it would be the same situation that Schaefer found in the late 1960s. Being anti-noise wasn't enough. What inspired people and why we're still doing this 50 years later is because he turned it around to a more positive, listener-centered approach in soundscape, which I needn't elaborate in this group. So it's, there's the extreme of this is the so-called survivalist kind of mentality, and I don't think it's going to get wide public appeal to it. So I think we should take encouragement from the way Schaefer turned around that situation, even if now the stakes seem to be even higher. Thanks.
No, that's a good point. I myself have been a little bit doomist, but I'm reading a book now called Life After Doom. So there's some interesting writings going on now where people are dealing with grief and then getting into a positive space. But if you don't work through some of the grief of ecological loss, it's kind of hard to get beyond that, and then you just sort of sit in denial. So it's a tough one. I agree. Jacek, you want to speak?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Barry said, which I found very resonant with also my experience of activities, local activities in Europe. This kind of division between the southern approach and the northern approach, because it's maybe too simplistic, but there is something to it that like when I go down to Italy or other southern European countries, it seems like a lot of initiatives are very much ad hoc, very much grassroots, and that there is a true passion about people really committing themselves to do something about their environments, about their communities, and the simple reason for that is that there are no structural tools or possibilities oftentimes for these people. I just recently established collaboration with Leandro Pisano. I don't know if you're familiar with this scholar and sound artist who's been running a sound art residency in a rural area in Italy. He wrote this rural manifesto, which is very interesting about bringing attention to rural areas, also in terms of soundscapes. There's so much, we all know there's so much focus on urban soundscapes or noises affecting lives of urban communities and so on. But he's trying to take a different angle, and he is running several very interesting initiatives in rural areas in Italy, and you can see exactly what Barry was talking about, that true commitment and passion about trying to solve something despite structural hindrances. And here in Sweden, where I'm based, the situation is kind of opposite. Like if you want to do something, you need to have an institutional label on it, so to speak. Things are very much controlled by institutions, by regulations, by high-level policies, and so on. And thus, you don't really see that much going on the grassroots level here. To the extent that I remember, like several times, I tried to initiate different small communal works, and some of the first, or art slash some kind of communal activities, sound walking groups, and so on. And some of the questions I was being asked by people who were joining or were curious were like, who is it financed by? Where are you getting like structural support for this? And I was saying, no, it's just my own little initiative. And then people look at you a little bit suspiciously, like that, like, well, they either like predict that you're going to fail, or they just don't see it as compatible with the system here. On the other hand, I also hear this interesting critique of people taking initiative and doing what the state is supposed to do, for instance. And I remember in Krakow, in Poland, where I'm from, there's a lot of very interesting stuff being done by city activists, for instance. There are amazing initiatives because of the dysfunctional systems, either on a city level or even nationally. And oftentimes, of course, these people are doing a great job, but they're being oftentimes critiqued for what they are doing because they are basically doing what the state is supposed to do, right? And then simultaneously, state is becoming kind of habituated to that situation and doesn't take that responsibility any longer on themselves. So there's also a risk of I don't know if I'm clear here, but if you praise too much local activities, if you just leave it for the local communities to take care of our planet, basically, then what about those who actually are in power to do certain decisions on a more kind of structural, strategic level, for instance? Because then, they might feel excused from doing things that are supposed to do because things are being done by those who truly care in a way. So I find it like sometimes kind of paradoxical that that situation.
Well, there are layers of paradoxes in the world in which we live. Lindsay, I wanted to bring it back to you because you started with talking about low tech, but also social justice and activism. And I'm hearing that, but you know, these are different things. You know, you can be an you can be an acousticologist and not be an activist. But as the world, you know, falls apart and reinvents itself, and that's happening simultaneously, I think of the future generations and what not only what we leave them, but the things that they inherit directly or indirectly. So where are you at in terms of what like action things? What can people do that's concrete in acoustic ecology and sound that can help us navigate the future with or without high tech, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think bringing it back to the concrete is a really good sort of way to direct this conversation. And at the same time, I also want to follow up a little bit on what Jacek was just saying, because I think that's that's a little bit at the core of some of what I'm struggling with as well. Like I'm just, you know, right now I'm based in the US, our political structure is crumbling. It's like having massive effects on so many others around the world. And it feels like grassroots organizing and small organizing, like ways of like creating communities to take care of one another is like this replacement for the larger scale collaboration that needs to happen for something like climate change. So I guess like in terms of like justice, I'm thinking about, I guess the thing I struggle with a little bit is like, I guess like how to frame like as we're sort of like thinking about how to, yeah, make systems that we want to participate in. Like, you know, can we build? I was really like loving reading about the version of the internet where it sort of like attaches onto buses and then sort of delivers information on these like bus systems as it gets closer to like the local receiving end. The information would get transferred and then the bus would continue on. Like those are really interesting and exciting. But I think where I get a little bit hung up, but maybe I don't need to get hung up there, is like that maybe we can all like strategize and organize these ways of living in a future where energy is less available, and at the same time somebody is launching a rocket in Florida that uses like some of the worst gases. And it's like the equivalents are just really sort of like the scale of that is really sort of just incompatible. So I don't think I'm making that same connection as I wanted to what Jacek was just saying, but I do think sometimes that if we're proposing things that work for us, it can, and not addressing these bigger structural elements or bigger structural issues, then powerful people are going to do what they want and sort of continue to say like, well, people are doing fine, we don't need to make any changes. But yeah, in terms of some of the concrete things, which I find really exciting, like I think I shared that solar protocol example, which was, yeah, an example of like trying to run this website project using solar powered servers. And so that was, yeah, I'll redrop, actually it's up at the top already. But that was a really, I think, interesting and sort of like way of thinking about this in terms of pleasure. Like, is there a way that as artists we can incorporate and think about some of these concrete changes as something that's interesting and exciting to us, rather than, I think, sort of what Barry was saying, like rather than just a sort of negative problem to overcome, how can it be an interesting constraint? And yeah, I think some of these like network-based things, these forms of communication interest me, maybe in my interest in listening. But yeah, I don't know. So I don't know that I have like super concrete examples, but some of these alternative yeah, systems. And I'll also share in a moment, there are, so just in terms of technologies, there's some really interesting ways that people have been working with like radio and combining sort of network systems. So Yeah, it's a little techy, but it's also, I think, can be interesting and creative. I'll drop one in the chat. Yeah, sorry, a little rambly.
That's fine. I asked you, and it was great. There are lots of older technologies too that one can go back to. That's part of the repertoire. Is it doesn't have to be a new technology. It can be an older, lighter one. We only have a few minutes left, and not everyone has spoken once. But if somebody wants to pipe in on like action points or concrete things, I'd love to end on a high note of obviously all the resources that we're going to share, but just if there are ideas or even attitudes, that we should take future forward in this area.
Hi, Claude, and everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've managed to connect through telephone. I've been listening to the conversation, but my apologies for the technological issues. But I would love to just contribute to ending on a high note in the sense that I think that this is a real opportunity for the community at large to, as was mentioned before, and I think bears repeating, that to look at ways to find more durable connections and to not succumb to a kind of fear or apocalyptic narrative in terms of the environment and our place in it. The more we go through this, the more I feel convinced that in a way the fear is even greater than the thing itself, and we have all the potential amongst us to turn things in the direction that is for the well-being for everyone. So I just like to at least say that much before the meeting ends up.
Well, that's very helpful, and it's a real thing because the attitudes that we take towards even the smallest things make a difference in terms of process, and those things multiply, and we can get out of a doom loop. I mean, this book I'm reading, Life After Doom, is mostly about recovery and spirituality and accepting reality. There's some really interesting areas there, and I like the way many of you brought it back to listening, brought it back to acoustic ecology, the way Schaefer did work, but also what's happening now. And so I get excited when people are doing artwork or research work that allows us to really see new possibilities, real possibilities, not just dreams. They can be dreamy, but they're very concrete. We're going to wrap it up in a minute. And I didn't say so much what I had to say, but I have the microphone here with my podcast, and in the next season I haven't decided what the theme will be, but it will be somewhere around the notion of rebirth and recovery in a positive way, but without denying where we're at and what we need to face. And a lot of artists are working on that and have interesting things to say. And I hope listening will be weaved in and out of that constantly, because that's an area of interest for me personally. And so how can those skills and those abilities that we've developed over many years, how can they continue and increase their relevance in society? C'est bon. Let's turn all our our videos back on just for a second, and then we can say, thank you to each other and good night and good morning, or depending on where you are. Does that work for everyone?
Thank you, Claude. Very much.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I literally have another meeting in a minute that I'm part of. So, yeah, so you okay with the recording? You okay that we put this on the air as an episode of content? It'd be part of my roundtable series, which is very informal. People speak about things they care about. And of course, I'll let the rest of our group, which is another 15 people or so, know about this, and they'll be able to access it. And hopefully you can get some dialogue. I'm suggesting we take a break over the summer in this little network and then start again in September. C'est bon?
C'est bon.
Au revoir.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.